Tonight on Free Minds TV, we're going to be talking about what Bill Gates has to say about the economic recovery, the Amish, the war on drugs, and a whole lot more. All coming up tonight on Free Minds TV.
And welcome to a brand new edition of Free Minds TV, where we challenge you, the viewer, to think outside the box. It is episode 144, and it is Toby here with you.
And Nick.
All right, Nick, we have a lot to be getting into tonight. We are going to be talking about the Amish and a supposed end to the war on drugs. We'll see. We'll be getting into that the second half of tonight's show. But first, I wanted to start off in Minnesota, Nick, where there has been a man who was sitting in his car, sleeping, a little bit drunk. His broken down car, did I mention? Who was arrested for drunk driving, and he's now spending 4 years behind bars for it. Well, the Supreme Court decided to weigh in on this, and they've upheld this conviction. All right, let's get into the story. The Supreme Court of Minnesota on Thursday upheld a drunk driving conviction of a man caught asleep behind the wheel of a vehicle that would not start. Yes, the car was broken down. At 11:30 p.m. on June 11th, 2007, police found Daryl Flex sleeping in his own legally parked car in his apartment complex parking lot. The vehicle's engine was cold to the touch, indicating it had not been started or driven recently. The keys were not in the ignition, but in the center console. But police officers decided to arrest him anyways. According to the affidavit, the officers tested the keys in the ignition and they didn't even turn it over. But didn't stop them from pursuing this case, and a jury of his peers did find him guilty, and a judge in the trial court sentenced him to 4 years behind bars because, yes, he did have prior convictions of DWI. The Supreme Court saying that because he was, quote, in a position to exercise domination or control over the vehicle means he was guilty of a DWI. Now, I thought that DWI stood for driving while intoxicated or driving under the influence. DWI, DUI, right? Driving was the key piece there.
And driving on a public road. In many states, it's operating motor vehicle on a public way.
Right.
You can drive drunk all you want.
This guy's private property, legally parked on private property, number one. Not driving, number two. Broken car, keys not in ignition, sleeping. Car cold, hasn't been started. But you know why he was convicted, Nick? You know why they even brought this to trial? Because he had previous convictions. And that is unfair. That's
but he'd already been found guilty of the
guilty until proven innocent. So they go, well, he was thinking about driving drunk. Well, now we're getting into thought crimes here, Nick. Because
and was he? I mean, can they necessarily show that he was?
Well, let's just say he was. He would have driven that car if it would have started and if he could have gotten the keys in the ignition. But did he do it? No. He didn't do it. He stopped himself. And that's why we don't arrest people before the fact. You can't arrest someone for murder if they didn't murder someone.
They just thought about it.
Attempted murder. And if these people want to write up some stupid little law saying attempted DWI, I'm probably not going to agree with it, but okay. But that's not what's here. He's been convicted of driving under the influence when he was not driving. He was under the influence, but he was not driving. Wasn't attempting to drive even.
Yeah, and essentially what they're saying is that he could have. I mean, if you boil down the Supreme Court's argument there, the majority decision is that he was in a position where he could have exercised control over the vehicle and could have made it dangerous.
They said domination.
Domination or control.
I like domination.
Well, thanks for sharing, Toby. But I think getting back to the case here is that it was essentially they're prosecuting and upholding his conviction for intent, that he could have potentially done it.
But Nick,
you don't convict somebody for potentially committing they had the potential to commit a crime that they did not in fact commit.
I could rip you to bits right now, like stand up and go crazy and just kill you on air right here.
You probably could.
I'm capable. I'm a large person and you're a not large person. Don't let the camera angles fool you. But am I going to be charged with murder and go to jail for this? No. Of course not. That would be insane. But yet, they got prosecutors and judge and a jury to agree, and now the Supreme Court to agree that essentially the same thing's true because this guy had previous DWI convictions. That's not fair. That's saying guilty before innocent is BS. I don't like it. I'm not saying driving drunk's good, but give me a break. This guy's now going to be spending 4 years behind bars as a result of this.
Yeah. I mean, it's important to point out, yeah, he did have previous convictions. That doesn't necessarily mean, it might be an indication.
He's dangerous, keep him behind bars, Nick.
Right, but he had served whatever the sentence was, I would assume. He's out, he's walking about, so he's a free man. He's not. It doesn't mention that he was under any kind of, there was no warrant issued for his arrest because he hadn't paid his fine or served previous jail sentences. So he did serve out his sentence for his previous offenses. As far as I'm concerned, it could be considered at sentencing, I think. I think it would be fair, had he in fact driven drunk, if they're considering how harshly to sentence him, to say, well, yes, you've done this habitually, it's a pattern of behavior. I can see a justification for that. But to say, well, you're guilty of doing something that you clearly didn't do, that we're not even alleging that you in fact did, because you've done it in the past, that's a problem.
Yeah. It's essentially saying if I have a previous burglary conviction, Nick, and I've been found guilty and served time before for breaking and entering into a house and taking someone's property. I have got that conviction, but now I'm a free man. I'd be rehabilitated, so to speak. And now I'm going to be arrested for walking past an apartment building because what if I had the intent to rob it? What's the difference? I don't see much of one. Anyways, we do need to move along. If you have a different opinion on this, you can send it to us. fmtv@freemindsmedia.org is the web address. Agree, disagree? We'd love to hear from you. All right, though, for now, it is time to move on to a very rich man, Mr. Gates. And what's he got for commentary on how the United States economy is doing, or maybe the world economy? I don't know. I haven't read the article. You tell me, Nick.
Well, Bill Gates, who is still the world's richest man, said on Monday that the U.S. economy could take years to recover from recession and predicted taxes will have to rise to bring the federal budget into balance, which is probably true. Either that or they're going to have to dramatically cut spending, which is what I prefer to see. More likely to raise taxes, I would think. Speaking on ABC's Good Morning America, Gates also warned against too much government intervention and urged President Barack Obama to focus policy on long-term issues such as education to combat the effects of the worst recession since the Great Depression. When you have a financial crisis like that, it's years of digging out, said Gates. The budget's very, very out of balance, and even as the economy comes back, without changes in tax and entitlement policies, it won't get back into balance. And at some point, financial markets will look at that, and it will cause problems. Essentially, what Bill Gates is saying here, he goes on for one more sentence. Taxes are going to have to go up, and entitlements are going to have to be moderated, which means cut. What Gates is saying here is to balance the budget, because we are so far into a hole, that what Washington would have to do is both raise taxes and cut services.
Sounds like what we've been saying for years on this show, Nick. Yeah. We've been saying essentially the same thing. We haven't been watering it down, and so nice, like Mr. Gates has said, we're more cutting it to the point. He's having us read between the lines a little bit here, but we've been saying the exact same thing for years. But I guess since he's very rich, people are going to believe him. But we said it first. Check out the archives.
I think we're friggin' doomed.
Yeah.
Quite honestly. I mean, the longer this goes on, the wider the difference between the spending and the revenues gets. The deeper into the hole the federal government gets. They have the debt. They have the interest on the debt. Remember, it's not interest. It's not just money sitting out there that we have to pay back at some point. That money has been lent to the United States by financial institutions, foreign investors, other central banks. And at some point, not only is the principal going to have to be paid back, but so is the interest. And you're talking about interest on multiple trillions of dollars. That starts to add up. And even if they start to try to reverse this trend sometime soon, with how slowly things move in Washington and how poorly they actually get things done, and the addiction that politicians, especially those in Washington, have to spending your money and running up a debt in your name, I don't see how they're actually going to even start getting revenue neutral from year to year on the budget for at least 5 or 10 years.
Point of order, Nick. Question. Say the federal government continues to grow. They don't take these heatings into account. They continue to grow, debt. They eventually go bankrupt, cease to exist. Who's all that debt belong to? Does it disappear? It's an honest question. I'm just curious.
I don't know. Well, it is an interesting question. I mean, for the United,
made that obligation on us,
there's
right?
a couple of different things that could happen. I think a default where the United States actually goes insolvent and simply defaults on the debt, refuses to pay it back, is unlikely. I think more likely you'd see inflation. Essentially, the money would just be printed, which they could do today if they wanted to.
That's
they
essentially
could print
defaulting on a debt, though, Nick.
It is, because paying back all that money, the dollars that they're paying it back with are essentially useless. They're worthless. But they could print off, just for the sake of illustration here, a big, whatever the deficit is now. It's about 13 trillion.
Ooh, it went up quickly.
The debt. Well, yeah.
I remember reporting on 11 trillion, Nick.
I'm pretty sure it's over 12.
Ooh.
But whatever it is, let's say it's 12 trillion. They can print off a $12 trillion bill. Well, of course, we owe it to different people, but essentially print off $12 trillion, pay everybody back.
With one bill. Well,
in theory. I mean, if it was all owed to
it really would be some clicks on a keyboard or something.
Yeah, but essentially then the dollars in your pocket would be worthless. Yeah. Not quite worthless, but worth maybe 10 cents, 5 cents in today's dollars.
Unless something's done, eventually it will come to this. Unless something's done. And there's no other way to get around it. The United States, the federal government, will cease to exist unless at some point something is done. Yes, there are multiple different things that can happen, but at some point the tax and spend has to be addressed. The printing of money has to be addressed. All these unfunded mandates eventually are going to be coming due.
Right, and when I said before that we were doomed, I was exaggerating a little bit, but there is no good answer. I mean, there's no good way out of this. The U.S. federal government owes a lot of money to creditors, and they have a couple of options, and as we mentioned, they can default on the debt, which essentially does away with the U.S. federal government. They're really not going to be able to borrow money. They're not going to be able to function. I wouldn't necessarily mind if we didn't have a U.S. federal government, but that's one option, and certainly that would cause a certain amount of chaos, a certain amount of confusion and panic, and probably a depression in the financial markets. And with the option of inflation, it's not painless. It's going to erode the purchasing power of every American's money. It's going to eat away at your savings. Your savings could essentially be done away with overnight. And the other option, which is to do the honest thing, I suppose, is to raise taxes and cut services. So Americans will pay more out of their pocket, and I already think we have a significant tax burden in this country. People would pay more and get less for generations at this point. So I'm not sure which is worse, to print off all the money and simply get it over with, have a big dislocation, a big problem with the economy for a couple of years, and then start from scratch with a very limited government, very, very low taxes, and in an environment where the economy could thrive, or whether we slug on for another 20 or 30 years trying to pay off a debt that we probably won't anyway, and in the end, we'll just print off the money to pay.
What about a third option, Nick, of not doing all or the other? What about an option of scaling back the federal government, giving that power back to the states, rather than just dissolving the federal government, essentially scaling it back so it doesn't all have to be done at once, make my dollars in my wallet go from dollars to zeros overnight, essentially. I mean, if it happens all at once, if it was scaling back slowly and the government, first of all, stopping its growth and then scaling back its growth.
Well, we can't, I mean, you can't do the namby-pamby scale back 5%.
No, it would essentially mean getting back to constitutional size government immediately, giving out back all those.
Yeah, that might work, and constitutional size government except for the tax burden. If you kept the tax burden that we had today and say cut government spending at the federal level in half, certainly you could pay off that debt. Is that going to happen? From in today's environment?
I decided just now, Nick, I have no interest in paying back that debt, my portion of it.
I really don't either. I didn't rack it up.
Who do I even owe it to? China? Some businessman
you owe it to whoever. You owe it to whoever the federal government borrowed it from.
Some wealthy man all over the world, and people here in America. I don't really want to pay it back. I decided I'm not gonna.
Well, I don't know how much of a choice you have, Toby, but I'm not excited by the prospect of paying it back either, because frankly, much of the debt was racked up before I even had a vote. It's absurd, but every man, woman, and child in this country, children that were born today, as you're watching us, owe a significant amount of money.
It's so
I think
hard
it's over
for
$300,000 a person or something like that.
It's so hard for an individual to wrap their head around what this actually means, though, Nick. What's it actually mean to me? You say me as an individual. The federal government has borrowed tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars on my behalf in order to have these government services. I don't think that's real. I know I've always talked about
well,
it.
It's not like you racked up. Yeah, no, it's not.
I remember talking about it in school though when I was a kid. They're like, you as an individual owe this much money.
I don't think you have a moral obligation to pay this debt.
I don't have a moral. I didn't ask for the money. I don't want the money. I don't think it's being spent in a prudent way.
Well, the money wasn't really spent on you. The money was spent. A lot of it was spent on
my name.
To defense contractors made a lot of money off of this. A lot of wars were fought with this money in your name. A lot of programs that you probably object to, whether they're welfare programs, whatever it is, programs you probably object to, those were funded with this money, and this debt has been incurred in your name to pay for all those things. You didn't incur this debt. The federal government incurred it for you. And regardless of what we do now, even if you don't want to pay it back, that's fine. I can see a moral argument being made for defaulting on the debt. It is going to cause significant disruption in the economy.
Yeah, and the other problem
we're all going to pay for it one way or the other.
Well, I don't need to. There's a way out, Nick. You could get rid of all American dollars, and then you're out, because that's how they default on you. That's the only way to default on it, is to get rid of your American dollars, because eventually they'll pay you back through inflation, and your dollars become worthless, and that's what would eventually
Well, I've always
happen.
thought. I mean, if you had a political will to do this, I've always thought you could. It's sort of a scam, but so is the whole national debt thing, as you were pointing out. You could always introduce a second domestic currency backed by gold or silver. Not the Amero. Oh. Not that North American Union stuff. But a U.S. dollar that's actually backed by gold and silver. Put that out there in circulation for a year or two so everybody can buy it up.
Yeah.
And then just print off all the trillions of dollars in Federal Reserve notes.
China businessman, when you loaned us money, it was with this worthless dollar.
Exactly.
We've switched to this rich dollar.
Yeah, and a lot of countries have done that before. They do a currency switch. So you switch over, make sure the American economy is circulating all that good gold and silver back currency.
Screw those people in China.
And then not just the Chinese, but just screw all of our creditors.
Screw those rich Americans. Screw everybody who's rich.
Yes.
All right. We do need to take a little break here because we do have a lot more to get into. Stay tuned. We'll be right back with a whole lot more. This is Free Minds TV.
This is Glenn Jacobs, and you're watching Free Minds TV.
And welcome back to Free Minds TV. As always, it's Toby here with you.
And Nick.
All right, when we left before, we were talking about this huge, massive debt, how Bill Gates is even saying the richest man in the world is not as rich as he used to be, because his dollars are becoming worth less as well as all this crash of the stocks and stuff. Even he's saying that America is essentially doomed if we're down this same old track here. I wanted to get into another one of these unfunded mandates that we will be borrowing trillions of dollars for in the future. But a little bit different twist. We're not really going to be focusing too much on the actual health care bill. We're going to be talking about some loopholes, or possible loopholes, in this federal health care bill that is being pushed through. This coming from Washington, while millions of Americans will be forced into buying health insurance, if and when this bill goes through, I'm saying when, there are some people who may be exempted. The Amish, for example, may have religious exemptions out of a federal mandated health care bill. Now, for people who don't know what's going on here, the federal government is proposing a health care bill. Yes, we've all heard that, but it's going to force individuals to have health insurance or be fined with possible jail time even. I think that's more for the employers if they don't offer the insurance. It gets very complicated, thousands of pages, but essentially you are forced to buy health insurance or pay a substantial fine. But what about people for religious reasons object to health coverage? The Amish people, for example, they take care of their own. They don't believe in this westernized medicine. So why should we be forcing them to have health insurance? Well, it's not me, it's the federal government forcing them to have health insurance or else be fined. Doesn't seem very fair. Also seems very unconstitutional. Not that I think that there's this one-size-fits-all health coverage bill forcing Americans to have it is constitutional in of itself. But what about religious exemptions? Should get people who religiously object to having health insurance, should get them out of it, shouldn't it, Nick? And it looks like there actually are some provisions being put into this bill that would allow for Amish people to get out of it. the healthcare bill. It's not really saying too much about other religious exemptions, though. What about my religion that I just created just now, Nick? It's called the not wanting to have healthcare bill religion. It's a religion.
If you're a 501c3, nonprofit, and you have tax sheltered status, then you might be able to make a case.
All right. Anyone want to join my church?
Yeah, I mean, that's been done. There are a lot of nonprofit religious organizations out there. There are a lot of churches that are recognized in the tax, for tax purposes. And I think if you're going to recognize one, they're going to have a very hard time discriminating, saying, well, we think you have a valid religious exemption, but we don't think this religion does.
Wait, my belief's more crazy than your belief? What the hell?
Yeah. And
whose crazy belief is crazier?
When you get into religions, they're really...
It's all based on craziness, right?
Right. Well, they're belief systems, and they're not necessarily found in any rational scientific view of the world. It's religion. It's based on faith. So, yeah, it's just one person's theory about what's right and wrong and what the world really is.
But if you get enough people to agree on this craziness, then you get all these exemptions.
Exactly.
I need more people to agree with my craziness that I don't want health insurance. Seems like it's the only logical religion out there. Anyways, I'm not really trying to bash religion. I don't care if you're religious, as long as you're not using it to legislate laws. Anyways, let's move on from that. I just wanted to bring that up. Interesting little fact here. If people want to create a religion against having health insurance, seems like a logical jumping off point for me.
Well, you should have health insurance. I just don't think the government should mandate it.
Yeah, I have health insurance. I want to get rid of it if they're telling me I have to have it, though. I don't really even go to the doctor. I'm young. Someday. Anyways, we do need to move on, Nick. We did promise it before talking about the war on drugs, and you told me when you came into the show, I was like, what do you got for show content, Nick? And you said, I've got an article about ending the war on drugs. And I was like, we've been amping up the war on drugs for years, Nick. How is this possible? You said, save it for the show. You've got an article talking about the possible end to the war on drugs. All right, sell me.
It's coming from The Independent over in the UK. After 40 years of defeat and failure, America's war on drugs is being buried in the same fashion as it was born, amid bloodshed, confusion, corruption, and scandal. U.S. agents are being pulled from South America. Washington is putting its narcotics policy under review, and the newly confident region is no longer prepared to swallow its fatal prohibition error. Indeed, after the expenditure of billions of dollars and the violent deaths of tens of thousands of people, a suitable epitaph for America's longest war may well be the plan in Bolivia for every family to be given the right to grow coca in its own backyard. So a lot of Central and South American countries not so pleased with the war on drugs anymore. You've probably heard about the drug-related violence in Mexico, and it's just no end in sight. I mean, it's a real war. It's a shooting war down there south of the border. It's not just Mexico. It's most of Central and South America. And it's all caused by demand here in the United States for drugs that the U.S. government has deemed fit to outlaw. The war on drugs, declared throughout the world by Richard Nixon in 1969, is starting to show some cracks. I'm not saying it's ending today. I'm not saying drugs are going to be legal next year here in the United States. But there are signs that there's some softening to the approach here, and that it's just difficult to ignore the fact that it's a failed policy at this point. The U.S. government is preparing to withdraw their agents from narcotics battlefields from Colombia to Afghanistan, and sort of ramping back the rhetoric.
Sounds like from this article, what I'm hearing so far is that we're no longer fighting a foreign war on drugs. We're now going to be concentrating on our own soil, because we've seen the numbers, we've reported on the numbers, Nick. They're still arresting every single year more drug users than ever before. Not necessarily drug dealers, but there's more drug-related arrests each and every year than ever before.
To this point they have, but I think we might actually be at a turning point.
And it's interesting. So when you're compiling these numbers, it would be interesting to actually go through and look. Yes, there's more drug arrests, but is that winning the war on drugs? Probably not, because if you actually look at the numbers, it's mostly just simple possession. I mean, we're not talking about drug dealers, so are you going to be winning a war on drugs by arresting the end user? Of course not. The supplier is still going to be there, and the supplier will always be there when you're talking about any black market. So even with pointing to these numbers, I guess there could be a case to be made that the United States isn't fighting as hard for the war on drugs if they're only going after the end user.
There are some cracks appearing here in the United States too. In the U.S., where drug offenders, principally small retailers and possessors, have pushed the prison population to 1.6 million. Their imprisonment is already straining federal and state budgets. In Mississippi, where drug offenders once had to serve 85% of their sentences, they are now being required to serve less than a quarter. California has been ordered to release 40,000 inmates because its prisons are hugely overcrowded, not to mention the fact that California was pretty close to bankrupt. Overseas, we're seeing that the presidents of Brazil and Colombia have both appealed for cannabis decriminalization here in the United States. So there's a political shift taking place in South and Central America where a lot of these drugs are being produced. They're not so happy to allow the United States to have its narcotics agents in their countries.
Right, not only that, I mean, it creates all these people manufacturing drugs in other countries. When the United States have a strict prohibition on this, well, there's a market for other countries and other people around the world to start producing these drugs and creating them. Do other countries necessarily want that? No, of course not.
No, especially when they're the center of the production and the
Right.
ground zero for the drug-related violence that goes with that.
Exactly. So there's a lot of support all around the world for ending this. And as we've reported on, Mexico, for example, decriminalizing all amounts of very small amounts of drugs hasn't really done much so far. So they're still up in the air, but we will continue to report on where this goes in the future, of course.
Yeah. And I just wanted to note that Venezuela and Bolivia have expelled U.S. narcotics officers from their territory. And at the end of last month, President Rafael Correa of Ecuador ended Washington's lease of an airbase on the Pacific from where U.S. aircraft were engaged in the struggle against the region's increasingly powerful left. So
well, there you go.
Yeah, I mean, that's
a big crack.
That
is actually a big crack.
And in Bolivia, the president of Bolivia is pushing for families to be able to grow their own coca leaves, which they're not using cocaine. They're using the unrefined plant, the less potent form of cocaine, and to export it to neighboring countries. So it seems like South and Central American countries, they're ready to be done with the war on drugs. Mm-hmm. Once they're done with the war on drugs, it's going to be much more difficult for the United States to wage war on drugs.
I like the idea. Let stupid people make stupid decisions and live with the consequences, so long as they're not infringing on my rights. Anyways, different opinion, we'd love to hear it. fmtv@freemindsmedia.org is the web address. Agree or disagree, we would love to hear from you. Also log on to our website, freemindsmedia.org. There's ways to watch the archives, the radio show, and of course ways to contact us and help us out. All up at freemindsmedia.org. Until next week, it's been Toby here with you.
And Nick.
Have a good one.